The way forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਐਨਕਰੇਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਵਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਪਾਣ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੇ ਯੰਗ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਵਾਂਗੇ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਨਾ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੜੇ ਡੀਪਲੀ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਡ ਹਨ बल्कि हुण वो नेक्स्ट स्टेप ले रहे हैं और आप एक इलेक्शन में कैंडिडेट बन के खड़े हो रहे हैं। आज असी स्वागत करते हैं बाल्टीमोर तो समय सिंह किंद्रा जी का। समय थोड़ा बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
And thank you Arjot for having me today.
Samay, we thank you for contributing to this movement in our community ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਾਮਿਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਵੱਧ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਮੂਲੀਅਤ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਦਿਨ ਬ ਦਿਨ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਤੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ, ਜਾਣੂ ਕਰਾਇਆ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀ ਬੜੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਇੱਕ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਏ ਹੋ ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਤੱਕ, ਆਪਣੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਤੱਕ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਵਾਂਗੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਲਈ ਰਨ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ?
Yeah, so I am running for the Baltimore County Board of Education. So in Maryland, a lot of the counties have elected boards of education. So in Baltimore County, there's 7 elected members of the Board of Education, and they essentially run the school system in Baltimore County. They have over $2 billion budget that we're in charge of. Everything from the administration of the school to the curriculum, the policies, deciding where new schools are built, how infrastructure and resources are split throughout the county, sort of all of that, the entire school system for the county. Which is one of the largest, not just in Maryland, but in the nation. And so I'm running to be the 4th district representative on that board.
Samay, ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿਵਿਕ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਇਟ ਸਟਾਰਟਸ ਫਰਮ ਦੀ ਸਕੂਲ ਬੋਰਡਸ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਰਟੀਕੂਲਰ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ, ਕੀ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਰੋਲ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਐਂਡ ਵਾਈ ਇਜ਼ ਇਟ ਸੋ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਟੂ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਟ ਇਨ ਦਿਸ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਥੋੜੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਵਿਸਤਾਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਦੱਸੋ। Tell us about yourself. Were you born here? Did you go to school here? ਕੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ presently ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ Baltimore ਵਿੱਚ?
Yes, I'm born and raised in Baltimore County. I went to these same schools that now I hope to represent. In fact, all the schools that I went to are on this side of the county that the district that I'm running in is on. So born and raised in this area. That's why it's so personal to me to be able to come back and really solve those issues firsthand that I saw in the schools. In terms of sort of what I've been up to and how I've gotten to where I'm at. When I was in high school, I was an intern for Senator Ben Cardin, U.S. Senator Cardin. That's where I got my start in politics and really seeing firsthand what it's like. I then was a page in the Maryland General Assembly where I really got to see the legislative process at the state level, what it looks like. After that, I worked for the Maryland Democratic Party in the 2016 election cycle. And as we all know, the 2016 election cycle was quite exciting and had a lot going on. And so I got a lot of great experience to see what it's like, how campaigns are run, what it means to really put together a platform and be out there and talking to the community. And then in 2018, 2019, I was at the DNC helping prepare for the 2020 elections. I graduated from the University of Maryland in 2020. I'm now in law school at the University of Maryland. I finished up my second year this year, so next May I'll be graduating from the University of Maryland Law School. While I've been in law school, I've been a member of the Baltimore County Central Committee. The Central Committee in Maryland, every county in Maryland has a Republican and Democratic Central Committee, and those represent the party at the very local level. So I was appointed to an open seat in the Baltimore County Central Committee in November of 2020. So I've been serving there since, and now I'm running for the Board of Education. Also, while I was an undergrad and while I've been in law school, I've served on a number of boards and commissions and advisory councils, which has allowed me to do a lot of great work, especially in the area of inclusion and equity. So while I've been serving or was serving on the Baltimore County Diversity Council, I got to work with the Baltimore County Police Department and actually worked with them on a cultural sensitivity training program specifically for the Sikh and Punjabi community. So I made a series of videos and did an informational lecture about Sikhi. Why do we wear a turban? How do you, if you're the police and you encounter a Sikh gentleman with the turban, how do you remain respectful of it? Just again, helping bridge the gap between our community and law enforcement. And that's just one example of what I've done. When I was an undergrad, I worked in the General Assembly. I was the Director of Government Affairs for the University of Maryland Student Government. And so what that meant was I was in Annapolis, in our state capital a lot of the time, advocating and working on bills that affected students. And one bill that I had the privilege of not just advocating on, but actually came up with the idea, got to write it firsthand and see it get passed, had to do with reducing the cost of textbooks for students in the university system in Maryland. And that's something I'm really proud of, because I know that for generations going forward now, I've helped make a difference when it comes to students being able to pay for textbooks and better their financial position in college.
Mm-hmm. Samay, that's a very impressive resume. I'm not sure if all of you has registered everything that you have done, but it's very important for us to realize, or ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ you have gone through the grassroots, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਸ country ਵਿੱਚ political process ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸਦੇ ਹਰ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਕੇ ਗਏ ਹੋ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੈਨੇਟਰ ਦੇ ਆਫਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਕੈਂਪੇਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਨਵੋਲਵ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ। ਉਸਦੇ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਨਕਲੂਜਨ ਔਰ ਇਕੁਇਟੀ ਦੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ, ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬੜਾ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਹਲੇ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਵੇਂ ਆ। ਲਾਅ ਇਨਫੋਰਸਮੈਂਟ ਦੀ ਏਜੰਸੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ, ਕਈ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਲੀ ਤੱਕ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਣ ਹਨ, ਇਹ ਟਰਬਨ ਕਿਉਂ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਈਡੈਂਟੀਫਾਈ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਬੜੇ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਗਰੁੱਪਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਟੀਵੀ ਤੇ ਕੁਝ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਟਰਬਨ ਪਾਏ ਦਾ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ, ਇਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਰੋਸ਼ਨੀ ਹੋਰ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ? ਕੀ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ?
Yeah, so I think generally it hasn't even been a choice of mine. It's sort of been by necessity a lot of the time of working on this inclusion and equity sort of work, and that's because, as you well know, not a lot of us, not a lot of people that look like us are in politics. And so, there was oftentimes very early on where I questioned if this was even the space for me, because, I was doing work for a couple years and I never saw anyone that looked like me. And, I was sort of just getting recognized as, oh, this is that kid who's around, who's always wearing a turban. Nobody would remember the words I would say. They would just remember the turban on my head. And that was really disheartening at some points. And that's really when I realized that if I wanted to make this space one where we were welcome, that I first had to work on that inclusion and equity perspective that you mentioned, which I've done, even within the school system. So I've worked with the social studies department at BCPS at Baltimore County Schools and brought in the Sikh Coalition. And so last summer, the Sikh Coalition actually came and gave a presentation to all the social studies teachers in Baltimore County, explaining to them who Sikhs are, our background, our culture, our religion, why we wear a turban, sort of just the basics. That way, at least these teachers, when they were talking about world religions or world cultures in the classrooms, they would be able to talk more on point about who Sikhs are, understand who we are. And every step of the way, I've certainly faced criticisms and issues about the fact that I don't typically look like someone who's working in politics. I certainly don't look like someone who people have cast their vote for before. And so that's something I'm keenly aware of. And it's something I decided early on that it's not something I'm going to shy away from, but it's something that I steer into. Because I also truly believe that the values that we hold as Sikhs, of treating everyone equally, of justice, of believing everybody should have the right to practice their religion without persecution and without judgment, I think that those are not just Sikh values. I think those tie in very well to a lot of the democratic with a lowercase d, right? The base democratic values that we have as a nation. And so when I've gotten into politics now, instead of steering away from my identity and trying to hide in the shadows, I'm very proud to be out there and say that I am a Sikh, and in fact the values that I hold are the values that have led me to public service, and they're the values that I think most Americans look at and would agree are not just Sikh values but American values. And so I've been really excited to bring that forth and be that person to bring that to people's attention. Samay,
we really laud you for all that you're saying, and we understand the challenges that you face. We have seen some political people who have gone to either change their religions or ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ appearance ਹੈ at least ਇੰਨੀ different ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ visibly ਦਰਸਾਉਂਦੇ ਹੋ, but ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕੀ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਣਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਏ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਜੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਏ, and because of that you have seen a lot of challenges, you have been criticized at some time. ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ, ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਨ ਚੈਲੰਜਸ ਨੂੰ ਓਵਰਕਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, so that it becomes an example for rest of us as well. ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward। The Way Forward ਇਸ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਬਾਲਟੀਮੋਰ ਮੈਰੀਲੈਂਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਰਡ ਆਫ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਸਮੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਕਿੰਦਰਾ ਜੀ ਨਾਲ। ਸਮੇਂ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੇ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਰੂਪ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਟਰਬਨ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਇਸ ਦੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਨਾਲ there have been challenges which you have been facing in this line of work that you have chosen for yourself. ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਥੋੜਾ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ what challenges have you faced?
Yeah, of course. It's nothing that I think is a surprise or shock to anyone. It's no one like us has really ever stood for elections and been elected in most communities. So when people see who I am, they often sometimes have a little bit of apprehension about voting for someone who looks that much different than them. I will say it is certainly not everyone. But there are times where we'll be phone banking, especially for this campaign that I'm on right now. We'll be phone banking. People will love my background. They will love sort of my experience that I've had. They'll really like the vision that I've laid out for the schools. It's very detailed. It's very nuanced. They'll love all of that. And then while we're on the phone, they might search my name and find my website and see my picture. And then you hear the apprehension in their voice. Sometimes you hear it, just the apprehension. Sometimes they say it. Sometimes they say, oh, did you come here legally? Were you born here? Did your parents come here legally? Or if they're not talking to me, if they're talking to a volunteer, they'll say, oh, I don't think I can vote for him because he doesn't look like me. Or he doesn't look like someone from this community. So none of this is shocking, right? I think this is all stuff that could have easily anyone could have told you would happen when our community decided to be more visible and run for elections. So it's not something that I'm shocked by. It's something that I knew was going to happen. It's something that I was prepared to deal with. It's something that I spent a lot of time reflecting on to really make sure that I as an individual was okay with knowing that there were going to be these instances where no matter how good of a candidate I was, no matter what great experience I had, no matter what great ideas I had, some people just will not vote for me because of the way that I look. And that's just the circumstances of what we're in. What I did when I was doing that reflection and when I was doing that deep thinking, what I did realize is that to sort of overcome that hurdle, there's a couple things that need to be done. So one is our community has to be there, right? We have to support each other. We have to be a base that can be relied on. And so I'm really glad that, here in the Baltimore area, we've certainly had a lot of members of the Sikh community support me through donations, holding fundraisers, even coming out. Tomorrow we have a volunteer event. I know we're going to have a number of members from our Sikh community out there, phone banking and door knocking for us. So, that's one. And then the other is, because I have spent so much time, like you mentioned, at really all levels of government. I've worked at the local level, state level, federal level. So since I've sort of built a bit of a reputation, I have that institutional support that helps, right? So, our campaign, my campaign for the Board of Education, we've been endorsed by the Teachers Union. We've been endorsed by the county executive. Couple endorsements that have yet to be made super public, but we are going to be endorsed by the state senator from the district. We're going to be endorsed by the Speaker of the House of the Maryland Assembly. So that institutional support also helps. So by having both the institutional support and the support from our community, I believe we can overcome that hurdle, right? That hurdle of just not being what people expect to vote for. So we're working on it. I think we're going to overcome it, but it's certainly something that I hope future generations don't have to deal with. and I hope that's something that I can help pave the way for.
Trailblazers always meet this challenge head on and create path for other people. I'm sure कि ये सारी difficulties and कोई भी जब नवी community आंदी है, let's say when blacks started running for offices, तो बाकी आम लोगों दा और उना faith उना ते ऊपर शुरू में maybe ना रहा होए, but with time when examples were created जब बहुत सारे लोगों ने बड़ा अच्छा काम किया, then a general idea of general faith जेड़ा वो बन जाता है. Other minorities, let's say there was a time when the word gay would be a no in politics. Today we have a central very high political figure who is gay, right? Not just one of them. The AJD acceptance है with time आंदी है. तुसी ओ जेडी difficulty है जेडी the initial difficulty है वो हटा रहे हो. We applaud you for that, as I said earlier. But as you said, इस चीज ਨੂੰ ਓਵਰਕਮ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ. ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ. ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਸਾਰੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਦ ਵੱਧ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਲੋਕੀ ਫੇਸਿਸ ਵੇਖਣ ਔਰ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਜਾਣਨ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਚ ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ. They are not talking anything which is outlandish, which is out of this world, which is not in our best interest. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we just become a little wiser as a community too about our political involvement. And what I mean by that is, I've sort of seen it in my own community where we obviously no one from our exact community, from the Sikh community is run, right? But we'll have people, well, say adjacent to that, right? We've had Pakistani, folks run and Muslim folks run, and it sort of instead of first looking at who these are as people and if they're truly good candidates, just because they look somewhat like us, we decide, oh, this is someone that we're going to support, right? And that's not always the best way to build our political base as a community, right? So I think one thing we have to do first off is obviously support ourselves and candidates who are exactly from our community. But even those candidates, right? We have to make sure that we're supporting good candidates and not just people basically simply because of the way they look and we think they may look like us, so they may think like us. So I think we've got to be a little bit more critical too as a community about who we're supporting and making sure that they're truly good candidates and not just people who we're sending money and support to because they look somewhat like us.
समय ਇਹ ਸੀ ਬੜੀ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਚਾਹਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ and the political positions that you hold so that we judge you as a candidate, not just as a Sikh candidate. First of all, please tell us what is the selection that you're running for?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm running for the Board of Education. In Baltimore County, there's 7 council districts, which means that there's 7 members of the Board of Education as well. Each council district gets one representative on the Board of Education. So I am running.
I'm sorry, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰੋਲ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਥੋੜਾ ਹੋਰ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ?
Yeah, so the Board of Education is in Maryland. The boards of education in each county are responsible for the entirety of the schools, planning. Planning new schools, the curriculum, school policies, the entire school budget. I believe last time I checked, it's over $2 billion in Baltimore County, right? So all of that is all in the hands of the Board of Education, and it's a vital role because we set the course of what the next generation learns in the schools, right? So if we decide not to adapt a curriculum that's inclusive, a curriculum that talks about people like us who are usually marginalized, that means the next generation of kids in this country or in this community will not get that education. So we have a really critical role to play in sort of setting up the next generation and setting up a base of what they're going to be taught in schools and how they're going to be taught in schools and what their schools are going to look like. What programs are we going to offer? There's a big discussion right now about how are we going to make sure that we're preparing students for jobs in the 21st century, because jobs in the 21st century look a lot different than the jobs in the 20th century, and we've got to make sure that we're providing students with those skills, whether it be technical or trade skills that are more applicable to today's world, and making sure really that we're setting up all students to succeed. As you know, especially in our community, the path after high school isn't always a four-year university, right? Or it's not always a college. Sometimes it's a trade school. Sometimes it's being an entrepreneur. Sometimes it's going straight into business. Sometimes it's military service. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're preparing all students to succeed, no matter what they choose to do after graduating. That's really what I hope to accomplish on the Board of Education, is to make sure that all of our students, no matter what they may go on to do after graduating, that we're providing them with an inclusive, equitable, and fair education that's going to let them succeed no matter what they choose to do.
कितनी लंबी appointment होती है if you get elected to this post?
It's 4 years. It's 4 years. Yep.
It's a 4 year, and you run on party lines as a Democrat or a Republican?
No, so that's the interesting thing. The Board of Education, and I know it's so in Maryland. I believe it's universal, but I can just speak for Maryland. The Board of Education is a nonpartisan position. So when people go to vote, so our we still have a primary, and to move on to the general. But the way it works is we're on everybody's ballot. So whether somebody is registered as a Republican or a Democrat or non-affiliated, independent, what have you, we will be on their primary ballot. There will not be any letter next to our name. We will not be identified as Republican or Democrat. And the top two vote getters from the primary will move on to the general, and then in the general, the top vote getter wins. We're on the same ballot as everyone else for the midterm. So when people go to vote in Maryland, our gubernatorial elections are on midterm years. So on July 19th of this year, people will go to vote for their party's candidate for governor and lieutenant governor. And at the very end of that ballot will be my name, along with the other folks running from my district to serve on the Board of Education. And then the two top vote getters from the primary for us will move on to the general.
Samay, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ Board of Education ਹੈ, you laid down the budgets and even the curriculum that is taught to the kids, ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ decide ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ. So something like critical race theory, which is like hotly being debated in the country right now, do you guys get to decide whether that should be taught or not?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a discussion that's already being had, and certain the issues and sort of circus that you see with a lot of boards of education across the country. Baltimore County is not immune from that. We certainly have had our fair share of that, and have some members who may feel that way, that we don't need to teach about critical race theory. We need to ban certain books, and we need to not teach about race and certain parts of history in school. And to me, that's absolutely wrong, right? That is one of my main reasons for running, was seeing what was happening around the country, and I wanted to make sure that was not happening in our schools, because I'm born and raised here. I plan on living here the rest of my life unless I'm forced to leave. And so, hopefully my kids in 10, 15 years, whenever I don't know when I'll have kids, but I hope they'll go to the same schools I went to. And I want to make sure they're learning the true history, right? That they're learning the real history of our country, even the tough parts about it, that they're learning about the social struggles that all groups have gone through in this country at some point or the other. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we teach our students about the past. What I like to say is that, to prepare our students for the future, they have to understand the past, because if you don't know where you came from, you can't really pave a path to where you're going. And so that's why I really think it's such a nonsensical debate to even have. Are we going to teach about all of our history? Are we going to teach about only certain parts of it? You got to teach everything, right? You can't act like certain parts of our collective history didn't occur, and you can't act like certain struggles didn't exist. And if you decide you're going to do that, then you're really it's a misfortune to the next generation, because they won't really understand how we got to where we are today.
Samay, so there's something we can responsibly announce here, that as a candidate, Samay supports the critical race theory, teaching of critical race theory at schools. Samay, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward। The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। Samay, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਮੁਲਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ in kind of a shock with what happened last week, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਿਸੀਜਨ ਸੀਗਾ, a draft of the decision was leaked। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਦਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਚੱਕਾਂਗੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕੀ ਡਰਾਫਟ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲੀਕ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, and what is this Roe versus Wade, this whole controversy will take advantage of you being a law student and being the thick of the situation?
Yeah. So, I'll as I said, I'm a law student and I've taken my fair share of constitutional law classes. I'm by no means an expert, but I can certainly, I think give a unique perspective about what this draft really does. So I think at the very base to establish is that what Roe versus Wade did was protect the right to abortion at the federal level. What that meant was states did not have a choice, were not allowed the choice to ban abortions at the state level. Right. Roe versus Wade said that the right to an abortion is protected in the federal Constitution. So by overturning Roe versus Wade, it is saying that there is no federal constitutional right to an abortion, and therefore it falls then to the states to individually decide what they're going to do with abortions, which is why there's already, I believe it's 25, maybe 26 states now who already have at the state level laws on the books that restrict or ban the right to an abortion. So that as soon as something like this happens, as soon as Roe gets officially overturned, in those states, it will be illegal or restricted to get an abortion. What overturning Roe versus Wade does not mean, it does not mean that abortions across the nation become illegal. Again, it just means it reverts to the states. So in a state like Maryland, the right to an abortion is protected. It's codified in state law. So it just depends state to state then whether an abortion is allowed or what those restrictions may look like. What the really interesting thing about the opinion is the way in which it overturns Roe versus Wade. So Roe versus Wade found that the right to an abortion is protected in the federal Constitution by this thing called the right to privacy. The idea of the right to privacy is that there's certain decisions that an individual makes that the government has no say in. And this right is not one that has an amendment, right? It is not like there is, like the First Amendment is the freedom of speech and to the press and all of those listed explicit rights. There is no, as anyone knows, there's no explicit right to privacy. You can't pinpoint it in any numbered amendment. However, for decades, I would venture to say maybe for the past century, it has been found that there is an implied right to privacy. That means that there's a number of amendments in the Constitution that imply collectively that there is this, what we call right to privacy. What Roe versus Wade says, what this draft opinion says about Roe versus Wade is that Roe versus Wade was incorrectly decided because there is no right to privacy, that the court wrongly found in Roe versus Wade that there is an implied right to privacy in the Constitution. What is scary about this is that that implied right to privacy, which has been uncontested for decades, it's been an agreed upon thing that there is this implied right to privacy that can be found by a close reading of a number of the amendments and what they imply, has been used to protect a number of things that we've come to accept as normal in our society. For example, interracial marriage was protected on the basis of it's a private decision that individuals make, and it's protected by the right to privacy. The right to use contraceptives was that states can't ban or restrict the use of contraceptives. That was protected at the federal level in a court case, Griswold versus Connecticut, which found that the right to use contraceptions is protected by the right to privacy, which is protected federally by the U.S. Constitution and the implied right to privacy. So if this opinion holds, and if it does not change, and if it really does contain this really strong language that the right to privacy is actually what's in question here, it could open the door. It could open a can of worms as to all these other rights that we've come to accept as normal. They may come into question because they find their protections in the right to privacy. So it would not be outside the realm of possibility for us to start seeing cases that question whether gay marriage is protected, because again, gay marriage was protected under the right to privacy. Interracial marriage, same thing. Contraceptives, as I mentioned, and those are just some examples. So that is really part of the scariness of this opinion, especially from a legal perspective. Is really what it opens the doors to, and the rights that it could put into jeopardy, rights that we have come to not question, that we operate on a day-to-day assumption as sort of inalienable, all of a sudden could potentially be questioned with some legal backing.
No, that's scary, and it might have more far-fetched repercussions than what we see right now. But let me ask you this: is there, what people are scared about is there a possibility? Let's say you say there are these 26 states that have outrightly banned abortion.
Banned or restricted, right?
Banned or restricted. Is there a possibility that there might be a federal law at some time which restricts, let's say, abortion all over the country down the line?
Well, I don't know about restricting. What I do know is that the Senate just tried yesterday to codify at the federal level the right to an abortion, so that states could not then ban it or restrict it. And it failed in the Senate, unsurprisingly. No one thought it would pass. By the same token, I don't think we're going to see any legislation pertaining to abortion pass both houses, both of the houses anytime soon, whether it be banning or making it more accessible. Just given the polarization of politics in Washington and the makeup of both houses, it's just not likely that we're going to see that. I think it really is going to be a state-by-state issue, which will become a state-by-state fight. And what that means is state elections, who your state legislators are, who's representing you in your state capital, is going to become even more important. Because again, they're going to now have the ability to dictate what abortion looks like in your state. And as I mentioned previously, if this draft opinion holds, and God forbid some of these other rights that I mentioned now come into question, and if these rights continue to be struck down, even those rights will then again be reverted to the state to decide if they're going to be protected or not. And so it really is putting, I think, if there's one takeaway from this, it's that we need to be paying really close attention to who's representing us at the state level, because there's the chance that a lot of these really important rights that we've come to enjoy could come down to a vote in our state capitals. And so who we vote for and who represents us, in our local and state, or at our state level, really matters.
That's an excellent point. That our people should be warned. They should understand कि ये ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਅੱਜ ਉਹ ਕਈ ਪ੍ਰਿਵਿਲੇजेस ਕਈ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਇੰਜੋਏ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਇਦਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਲੜਾਈਆਂ ਲੜੀ ਗਈਆਂ। there's a whole civil rights movement in this country, and ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ particularly one party in this country, they are not looking to go ahead, they are looking to go back more than 50 years। ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਪਾਸੇ ਲਿਜਾਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੜ ਕੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਆਇਆ for a better future, a better present. मैं on the side समय तरह से एक चीज पूछना चाहूंगा। जब सुप्रीम कोर्ट दे जजेस जब इन्हां दी नॉमिनेशन प्रोसेस हुंदा है किसी दा भी, whether for Senate or something, what they say on the floor, is that held to any account if they openly say this is the law of the land, we are not going to overturn it, this can be overturned, this is the law of the land, and then they turn back and that's the first thing they do? Is there any accountability here? What's the system there?
No, so there's not. So there's obviously the Supreme Court, that those justices are appointed for their term, the term is their life or until they retire. The only way to get rid of a Supreme Court justice is to impeach them, for the same standard that are used for what we saw for the President Trump. Sort of, everyone's familiar with that: high crimes, misdemeanors, things like that.
This is not an impeachable offense.
No. Like a bad legal opinion, unfortunately, or fortunately, is not an impeachable offense. And often, one thing that's really interesting just about the way the Supreme Court is that they make a lot of their own rules, right? So like what cases the Supreme Court actually hears and which cases they decide to hear, it's not. The Congress or Senate doesn't have any say over that, right? Or the voters really don't have any say over that. It's entirely the Supreme Court who writes their own rules and decides their own rules about a lot of these things. And to some degree, they hold themselves accountable. There are no laws about when or at least enforce laws about when a Supreme Court justice has to recuse themselves or when they can't recuse themselves. It's sort of all the Supreme Court policing themselves to an extent. So unfortunately, when they say one thing in their Senate confirmation hearing and write an opinion that says something else, there's not much that we can do other than try and pick better justices in the future and make sure that our senators that are doing that are doing a better job.
जी ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲੀ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਡ ਬੰਦੇ ਹੋ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਜਸਟ ਲਿਟਲ ਐਨਲਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ, ਬਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਐਨਲਾਈਟਮੈਂਟ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਇੱਕ ਛੋਟੀ ਜੀ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਅਦ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ। ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਸਮੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੋ, ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਚਾਹਾਂਗੇ ਮਿਡ ਟਰਮਸ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਲੱਗ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਬਾਈਡਨ ਦੀ ਪਰਫਾਰਮੈਂਸ ਐਂਡ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਇਨ ਲਾਈਟ ਆਫ ਆਲ ਦ ਇਨਫਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਐਂਡ ਆਲ ਦ ਇਕਨੋਮਿਕ slowdown that we're seeing around?
Yeah, so it's no sort of shock or it's no it's no secret that President Biden and the Democrats, by taking over the House and the Senate, inherited a pretty tough situation, not just because of the person that was exiting the White House, but also because of the pandemic that we had going on, and it wasn't an ideal situation to try and take over. And I do think that Democrats have. Certainly, we could always do better, but I do think we've tried our best. I always say that what's happening in DC is very different than what's happening here, at the state level. So I won't say that this is representative of the Democratic work that we're doing here in Maryland. Obviously, what's happening in DC is always at a different level, and takes on different faces. What I will say. About what President Biden is trying to do with the economy from an economic point of view is the correct thing. When you are facing, he saw that we're facing higher inflation, and so he encouraged the Federal Reserve to increase the interest rates, which is from a sound economic perspective is what you're supposed to do. It's not a Republican or Democratic move. It's an economic move. That is the right move. The purpose being that when you increase the interest rates, you're slowing down spending because you're making it more expensive to borrow money, right? So by making it more expensive to borrow money, people aren't going to borrow money to spend, which means spending is going to go down, which means you're slowing inflation, or at least that's the economic theory behind it, which tends to work. And so that, I think Democrats are doing what they can to try and fight these factors. And a lot of this inflation has been sparked both by the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, both of which really the Democrats didn't have haven't had any say over. The Democrats, can't tell the Russians just to stop, and the Democrats can't tell COVID to go away. But they're trying to deal with the situation that we have at hand, and I certainly think they're trying. I know now we see today the whole thing with the baby formula shortage, and I hear at least what I think is that President Biden is going to enact the Defense Act to sort of help with the production and sale of baby formula. So we're doing what we can. What I will say is that historically, if you look at it, no matter how good or bad a president does, whether Republican or Democratic president, what you see is that in the midterms following a presidential win, that party tends to lose some seats in the legislature. It's sort of just what comes with the ebb and flow of democracy. There's more of a spotlight. When a party wins the White House, there's more of a spotlight on that work, and it's very easy to criticize that work, whether it's good or bad. It's easy to criticize, and so that makes it easier for the opposing party to get some traction and get some momentum going into the midterms. That's 2 years removed from that president taking office. So, just from a historical perspective, Democrats were already, from the minute that Joe Biden was elected president and sworn in, the Democrats were already the underdogs in the midterms, right? No matter what Joe Biden did, no matter what the Democrats did for the next 2 years after January 2020, they were going to be behind, and they were going to be the underdogs. And so that's where we're at. And I think the Roe versus Wade opinion and sort of I hope that shocks some people into realizing that they need to get active and take a closer look at their elections. But it's certainly a tough task ahead.
That's what I hope कि ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ for granted ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੰਪਲੇਸੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਗੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੈਠ ਕੇ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਤੇ ਹਾਰਨਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ, 2 ਮਿਡ ਟਰਮ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਹਾਰਦੇ and this Roe versus Wade issue that has energized the party. I understand. I hope people need to stand up for their rights. They don't know what is at stake. Quickly, Samay, again, taking advantage of you being here, there's some major issues with gerrymandering that we are seeing now, also in New York and rest of the country. And I believe Baltimore, Maryland has had some issues as well. Can you quickly tell our viewers what gerrymandering is and what's the issue the country is facing right now?
Yeah, so gerrymandering, just a very like 30,000 foot view of what gerrymandering is. It's a way of packing and cracking, and use the terms that are used, of packing certain communities together and cracking apart certain communities. That way, the representation politically, in terms of party alignment, is exacerbated, right? So if you already have, say you already have a 60-40 Democratic split in a given state, if you gerrymander it and split up that Republican vote even further, maybe you can get an 80-20 split, right? And Republicans do it too. I want to make it clear this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. This is a Democratic with a lower D issue. This is a democracy issue when it comes to gerrymandering. Both parties do it, I don't. The only way that I foresee it really stopping is there is a movement in a number of states for states to enter into law that they will make their gerrymandering and redistricting process independent and nonpartisan, as long as the states surrounding them or a certain thresholds of states in the nation also agree to that. And it's sort of a pact, right? It's sort of saying, okay, if we can get half the states to agree that they will not gerrymander based on party lines, then we also won't gerrymander based on party lines. It's kind of a reverse game of chicken, if you will. And the idea being that if we're able to do that, then at least we won't be able to say that one party is doing it and one party's not, and one party won't feel like they're giving up gerrymandering when the other party's still taking advantage of it. I think there's a long way to go before we get to that point where we get enough states that are agreeing to that for that to sort of happen. But I think that's the most likely way, because otherwise, at a national level, there will never be a push to sort of get rid of it, because if Democratic states, like if Maryland was to stop gerrymandering, we would look and see, we would say, wow, but these other Republican states aren't stopping, so why should we? And vice versa when it comes to Republican states looking to stop, and they'll say, well, why should we stop? Because the blue states aren't stopping. So I think that's why the real way to sort of stop it entirely is for us to collectively agree as one, or as a pack of states, that we will not do it, and that way we don't feel like we're losing out to the other party in any way.
Samay, we took advantage of your grassroots experience with politics in this country. But let's go back to your election now. Tell us, what's the motive for you to run behind this election?
Yeah, so as I said, I went to these schools growing up. I saw the issues in these schools firsthand. And everything that I am looking to address in the schools, I have a vision based on three principles. The principles are student well-being, equity and inclusion, and educator advocacy. These are all issues, and sort of the specific plans I have under each of those principles all address issues that I saw as a student. So when we look at the student well-being issue that I meant, what I really want to emphasize there is financial literacy and mental health. Because when I grew up in K through 12 going to these schools, we were never taught financial literacy, and we were never taught how to deal with our emotions and our mental health properly. And so what I think is that if we can teach our students how to deal with their health and their wealth, that we will be setting them up to succeed no matter what it is that they choose to do after graduating. When I talk about the principle of equity and inclusion, what I'm really looking at there is the curriculum and school resources and budgeting. So with the curriculum, what I mean is having a curriculum that is truly inclusive of everyone. We have a really diverse county, we have a really diverse community, and we need to make sure that our curriculum reflects that. For me growing up, obviously, Sikhi was never really part of our world religions classes. Punjabi culture was never part of our world cultures classes. So that's just one example of sort of my personal perspective pushing me to make sure that our curriculum is inclusive. When it comes to, as I said, the school resources and infrastructure, is making sure that we're putting resources and dividing resources and money in an equitable manner, meaning that we're giving it where it's needed most. And I think that's a really crucial thing to differentiate from equality, or from, because there's a difference between equality and equity. Equity is putting things where it's needed most. Equality is sort of just splitting the pie evenly, blindly, without really realizing what each piece of the pie really needs. And then when I talk about educator advocacy, what I'm really focused on there is, one, tailoring to the classroom, and two, supporting teachers. So with tailoring to the classroom, what I mean by that is that the Board of Education, when we're setting forth policy and curriculum for the schools, that we're still allowing teachers who understand their individual classrooms the best to tailor their instruction and their policies to their classrooms. Basically, not to do one size fits all. That's the idea there. And then with the second part of educator advocacy, which is supporting teachers, that has to do with recruitment and retention. So not just, we have the issue of Baltimore County, but it's across the nation that we've seen it, especially after the pandemic, is an issue with recruitment and retention of educators. And so we've really got to do a better job of, one, creating programs that bring teachers in to our schools by partnering with local institutions of higher education that have great education programs and bringing those kids in when they're in college to see what it's like to be a teacher and bring them in. And also in terms of retention, making sure that we're paying teachers a fair salary, to making sure that our teachers are getting the support, the mental health support, the continuing education support that they need to feel fulfilled and to continue providing a quality education to our students.
ਸਮੇਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਉਹ ਬੜੀ ਕਲੋਜ਼ਲੀ ਸੁਣੀ ਹੈ, particularly ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਲਟੀਮੋਰ ਕਾਉਂਟੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿਊਅਰਸ ਹਨ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਬੜਾ ਕੰਪਰੀਹੈਂਸਿਵ ਪਲਾਨ ਸਮੇਂ ਨੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੈਂਪੇਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਅ ਵਿਊ ਹੀ ਹੋਲਡਸ ਕਿ ਅਗਰ ਇਹ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਇਲੈਕਟ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸਾਰੇ ਬਾਲਟੀਮੋਰ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਸਾਰੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਸਾਰੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀਜ਼ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਔਰ ਹੈਲਪਫੁਲ ਪਲਾਨ ਹੈ। ਬਟ ਪਰਟੀਕੂਲਰਲੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮਤਲਬ ਵੀ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਰੀਅਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਟੈਪਿੰਗ ਸਟੋਨ ਹੈ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੋਰਡ ਆਫ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ। ਐਜ਼ ਸਮੇਂ ਸੈਡ ਕਿ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਦ ਟ੍ਰੇਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕੀ ਕਰਿਕੂਲਮ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿਸ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਪੋਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕਲਚਰ ਬਾਰੇ, ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਅਗਰ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਛੋਟੇ ਹੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਏ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਏਲੀਅਨ ਦੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਅੱਜ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਅੱਗੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਾਂਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਚੱਲੇਗਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੌਣ ਹੋ ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਗਰ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਬੜੀ ਹੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਊਡ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਅਗਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬੜੀ ਬੈਨੀਫੀਸ਼ੀਅਲ, ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਅਗਰ ਅਕੰਪਲਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਨ ਪੋਜ਼ੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਪਾਰਟਿਸਿਪੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ। ਸਮੇਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਵਿਸ਼ ਯੂ ਆਲ ਦ ਵੈਰੀ ਬੈਸਟ ਫॉर योर कैंपेन।
Thank you.
We are proud for what you're doing. We wish you the very best and thank you very much for taking all the time today for speaking with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Harjot. I always appreciate it.
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਸੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੋਅ। ਆਈ ਹੋਪ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਲੋਜ਼ਲੀ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਹੋਣਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ।